Protests have erupted in cities across Belarus after longtime leader Alexander Lukashenko won a sixth term in the country's election Sunday. Demonstrators and the main opposition candidate in the election have rejected official results, calling the election blatantly rigged. According to a government-sponsored exit poll, Lukashenko won 80% of the vote against four rivals, avoiding a runoff vote. The 65-year-old has been Belarus's president since 1994. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay. He joins me now from Rome. Welcome, Chris. Great to see you. So can you tell us a little bit about Lukashenko? What is behind these allegations of rigging the country's election?
Well, Tanya, Lukashenko has ruled with an iron fist over Belarus for 26 years. He's often referred to as the last dictator of Europe. However, it seemed like that grip was loosening leading up to these elections. We saw thousands of protesters, regular people oftentimes, turning out to the streets and calling for his ouster, speaking out against a long track record of human rights abuses, jailing journalists, jailing political opponents, sometimes allegedly killing them as well. And we thought that we were going to see at least they hoped that they were going to see a different turnout from this vote. But considering how visibly the country was opposed to him in a way that we'd never seen before, the turnout, or rather the election result of him winning 80%, according to those state numbers, seems to strain credulity at the very least, and also helps us understand the amount of anger that is pouring out into the streets with these protests following the alleged fraudulent result of the election. Leading up to the election, we saw his administration jailing protesters, beating them, and now it was almost a foregone conclusion that the same would happen with this kind of result.
And so, Chris, who was the main candidate running against Lukashenko, and has that person made any announcement about next steps?
Well, her name is Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, a very unlikely opposition leader. She's a 37-year-old self-described stay-at-home mom, a former English teacher, and who somewhat reluctantly took up this position. Indeed, it was her husband who was supposed to be running as the opposition candidate. However, he was arrested and banned from running in this election, as were several other candidates. One actually had to leave the country for fear of arrest. Now, that sense of inexperience that she's brought to this election has somehow worked in her favor. This everyday woman kind of persona that she carries clearly has resonated with a vast number of people in Belarus who are simply fed up. That includes the rank and file, people who typically had supported Lukashenko, but for the first time pouring out to the streets by thousands and thousands of people saying enough is enough. Right now, she has said that this result is an absolute contradiction of credibility. She doesn't believe it. She claims that she is the winner and is calling for more protests. In fact, there are more protests scheduled for tonight in Minsk and throughout the rest of Belarus. And tomorrow, the opposition is calling for a nationwide strike.
So, Chris, looking at the bigger picture, there have been growing tensions between Belarus and Russia after more than 30 Russian mercenaries were detained last month. How is this proclaimed victory of Lukashenko's going to impact the country's relationship with neighboring Russia, if at all?
Well, that's a very good question. In fact, it is the question if you want to understand the geopolitics of what's taking place in little old Belarus, a country of just under 10 million people, but right next door to Russia. Now, Belarus has typically walked in lockstep with Russia. It gets its energy from Russia. It's gotten it at a favorable rate for many years until earlier this year when Russia jacked up the prices in what was seen as an effort to pressure Belarus into joining an even closer political alliance with Russian President Vladimir Putin. And then, as you mentioned, just before the election, there were these 33 alleged Russian mercenaries who were arrested in Belarus, and for what the president of Belarus claimed was an attempt to oust him in a coup. Now, that might raise alarm bells for people who remember what happened in nearby Ukraine in 2014, when these uniformed yet unidentified soldiers who turned out to be Russian soldiers began appearing in strategic points all throughout the Crimean Peninsula. That eventually led to Russia being able to wrest control of Crimea from Ukraine and to its eventual annexation in Russia. And it's important to remember that Vladimir Putin has always described the disintegration of the Soviet Union as the greatest political catastrophe of the 20th century. And many Russia watchers have long suspected that he's angling to rebuild it sometime in the 21st. And the latest out of Belarus might indeed be laying the groundwork for an eventual incursion. It's to be seen.
All right. Well, Chris Livesay in Rome, thank you so much for that.